Hello everybody, it's Matt Stevens here for another edition of the Skoda We Love Cycling video podcast. And my guest today is none other than Connie Carpenter-Phinney. Now, Connie was the Olympic cycling road race champion for women back in 1984. We talk about that race, what she felt like on the day. We also talk about the evolution of not just women's cycling, but women's sport over the last 30 or 40 years. We talk about how important it is to be a mentor. And we also talk about where Connie was when her daughter-in-law, Kasia Niewiadoma, won the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift. And there's a lot more too. You are going to love this chat. Here we are. Connie, thank you so much for joining us on the Skoda We Love Cycling podcast. It's an absolute pleasure. You're a flipping legend, and it's a privilege to speak to you. How are you?
I'm good, Matt. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm not a flipping legend. I don't know how to flip, but
maybe that was a little bit literal. I can assure all the viewers that Connie wasn't a gymnast, as far as we're aware. She did a lot of other sports, though.
Yeah. I tried gymnastics very early, and I was way too tall. So yeah.
Oh right, okay, yeah. All right. So no flipping on camera then.
Yeah.
Where in the, just for our viewers and for our listeners, just tell us where in the world you are.
Yeah, I'm in Girona, of course, one of the centers of the world for cycling. Spend my time between Girona and Boulder, another center of the world for cycling. Boulder's in Colorado in the United States, for those of you who don't know. Girona's in Spain, and Taylor, our son Taylor lives here with his wife Kasia, who everyone knows, Kasia Niewiadoma-Phinney. And so, yeah, I'm really lucky that my husband Davis and I can come here for a few months at a time and just enjoy being here. It's such a wonderful place to be a cyclist.
That's fantastic. How long have you been making that commute? Because that is a wonderful thing. I've been to Boulder once before the World Championships back in the 90s, and I was taken by the place. I absolutely love it. But when did you decide to spend almost half the year in Girona and half the year in the States? Is that just something that naturally happened? Because I know that Taylor's been living in Spain for quite a while, hasn't he?
You know, throughout Taylor's career, I was his sometimes life support system, sometimes financial manager, sometimes just, chef, sometimes probably an aggravation. But because he was so young when he turned pro, I spent a lot of time with him in all of his bases, which started in Italy because we as a family lived in Italy for 3 years when he was a kid, between the ages of about 12 and 15, he lived in Italy. So I love being in Europe. We had our bike tour business in Europe. Anyway, I'm giving you a long answer, but
That's okay. Please do.
But
it's you that's going to do the heavy lifting here.
But we traveled, really across the Mediterranean and Taylor's various places where he lived. So his first base was in Lucca. His second base was in Quarata, to be near Max Chandry and Cavendish. Mark Cavendish were living there at the time, Steve Cummings. Then he migrated toward toward France. Okay. Because Bobby Julich was his coach and was living in Nice. And, of course, a lot of cyclists live in between Monaco and Nice. And then that didn't last long because he had a really bad injury. And so then he moved along to, after he came back from his injury, he came to Girona and finally decided, yeah, this is it. I want to be here. So I found him a house here in 2015, and we had everything moved here. Ironically, the mover that moved all of his things from Nice to here, the last person he had moved from Nice to Girona was Lance Armstrong.
Right. Okay. There you go. It's a small world.
It's a really small world, made smaller by the fact that he told me his son had a goldfish, and his son's goldfish was named Taylor Phinney. It was just, the world is such a weird place. It is such a, and Taylor has fans in the most unlikely corners of the world. So this gentleman who I just met randomly off the internet, because he was an international mover. I mean, he moved some of the belongings back to America, had this connection that his son was a big Taylor Phinney fan. But anyway, so Taylor's been in Girona ever since, really. And part-time, full-time. He does have a home in Boulder, which he now rents full-time because he's not there, rents out full-time. But he met Kasia pretty much straight away. They met and were dating in 2017. And so that made him, want to spend more and more time here. And even when he stopped racing after the 2019 season. And then we had COVID. So to answer your question, when did we start coming here more regularly? It was after COVID and all the lockdowns that we realized we didn't get to see either of them for almost a year in person. Because Kasia's Polish, and that meant she couldn't fly into the United States. Taylor had a long-term residency card for Spain, but he wasn't sure if he left, if he could come back. And so they stayed. Meanwhile, we were in Boulder and really missing them. And I love to travel, and I really miss traveling. So Taylor said, at one point he said, TJ Van Garderen was giving up his apartment in Nice. Sorry, I'm getting my cities mixed up. In Girona.
In Girona.
And did we want it? And yes. So we took it over fully furnished. And that was that was like 3 years ago almost now. So it's been great. And so we come back and forth. It's not, the time change isn't easy, but because we stay for more than 2 months at a time, it's really nice.
So, Connie, how do you and Davis fill your time when you're in Girona? Because it is a beautiful place. It really, really is. But what do you do these days to keep busy? I know that when we were first arranging this call, you said, well, I've got to do it in the late afternoon or in the morning because I'm going to be out on my bike. So clearly you like to ride still. But yeah. How do you fill your days these days?
Yeah. Well, I try not to fill them too full.
Okay. I like your style.
And I'm good at planning if I have to, but if I don't have to, that's even better. A lot of visitors, of course, come through Girona, not to our place, it's too small, but we have actually friends visiting right now. Ironically, it's Taylor's the first babysitter I ever hired. Is here with her husband, who we've stayed longtime friends with, and her daughter is now an elite athlete in the sports of mountain running and cross country skiing. So they spend a lot of time in Europe, and her husband is Norwegian anyway, and they met at the University of Colorado Boulder skiing. Anyway, so they're here, and we've been riding with them, and they were at dinner last night with Taylor and Kasia, and so we every day is different here, and a lot of days are just really quiet, but we do keep the same bikes here that we have at home. We have e-bikes. We ride gravel e-bikes. Davis was an early adopter because you probably know that Davis Phinney, legendary cyclist, was diagnosed with Parkinson's when he turned 41 and totally flipped our life upside down. But the one thing that he knew and I knew is that we still like to ride bikes, and how are we going to make that possible? And truly the e-bike has been such a wonderful invention for us because we can do almost any ride we want. And we don't have to worry too much about wind or climbing because we get a little extra help, and we really appreciate that. But we ride the specialized Creo version, so you can ride at a very low level, or you can ride at low level of assistance or a very high level of assistance. So
I have ridden that exact bike, and they are great, aren't they? You press that little button on the top tube, and away you go. They are fantastic.
Yeah, and the hard thing is the bikes themselves aren't as responsive. I miss the responsiveness of a lightweight bike and the ease of transport. But otherwise, we feel really lucky. And so we ride, if not every day, every other day when it's not too wet or too hot or too cold or whatever. We're fair weather riders. And it really helps Davis's Parkinson's. So the one thing we know about Parkinson's disease is that the only really good thing for your brain as you age, and this is for everyone, not just Parkinson's, is to keep exercising, keep moving, keep the blood flowing. And so that's the one thing that if he doesn't do some sort of exercise every day, he feels a lot worse. And so do I. But I don't, it's because we need it. We crave it. But we don't need to push too hard. We ride for the scenery. We ride for camaraderie. We love to ride we have a ride set up with Taylor tomorrow, and that's really fun for us. Yeah.
That's just on your point there. I'm looking out the window now in Derbyshire in the north of England, and it's a pretty grim day. But I pick and choose when I ride, and that's really lovely. But my riding now is some of the best fun I think I've ever had, because you can stop and take it in and soak it up. And I've no doubt you'd be similar when I was riding, when I was racing. Although I still bizarrely like the pain, it was more of a process. But now I can really look and see and enjoy and soak it up, even in my slightly later years. I'm enjoying riding more than I ever have.
Yeah, I think you appreciate more as you get older, and I think any cyclist is really oriented toward geography, because we're always traveling very closely through it. And so as you get older, you will stop more for those viewpoints, and you'll also be more gobsmacked. Is that an English American term only? Oh, okay, gobsmacked. So
no, it's English as well. You can use that.
Yeah, so that when you see a sight that's beautiful, you're just like, oh my God, like as if you'd never seen it before, and you hadn't, because there's always a different nuance of light, or the grass is greener after a rain, or whatever it is. And it's just, the beauty of the natural world that we ride through is phenomenal. And that's what I really appreciate about Girona and Boulder, the fact that you can get up into the wild, and not be confined to the road. I ride the road as little as possible. I love to ride on gravel. I love to explore. Davis and I have a lot of fun adventuring, but that's not all we do. We founded the Davis-Phinney Foundation in 2004. Yeah. And so while we're away from the main office, we're always in touch with the staff that drive that, and we produce education and informational content for people with Parkinson's, and really serve as a lighthouse for people, whether they're newly diagnosed or have been living with it for a long time. Davis has been living with this for over 25 years. Probably had it even toward the end of his own cycling career. He notices. He can note symptoms now that you would never have linked to Parkinson's, but sort of a numbness in one leg and a kind of a wing-like carry of one side of his body and his arm. All of those came on much sooner than the tremor, which gets your attention. And not all people with Parkinson's have a tremor. So it was a long road, actually, to even get a diagnosis. And once you're diagnosed, it's not like cancer where there's an urgency to rush to medicine and treatment. It's more like, oh, man, now what do we do? And it's changed everything about how we live, and really who we are, but not all of it's for the worse. It's forced us to slow down in a way that a lot of people don't, and appreciate really good days the way people don't either.
Yeah, and how is Davis at the moment? How is he? You say he's getting out riding with you. How is he?
Yeah. You know what? He is a beacon of light for so many people. He has limited resources, limited energy. My voice is challenged right now because I had laryngitis a month or two ago, but his voice is always challenged. It's very soft. It's sometimes very inaudible, and he can't do the kind of storytelling he used to do. And that's hard for him. He can't do the public speaking he used to do. I would say that's hard, but Parkinson's is 24/7, so it bothers you all night long. It doesn't sleep when you want to sleep, and so he gets tired easily, and so I'm not gonna short sell the weight of the disease on him and on me. It's not easy. And in our family, I've been working on a memoir. That's the other big project I've been working on.
Yeah, I did see. So tell us a little bit about your memoir, because you've managed so far in your life, Connie, to do a lot of stuff. You've done a lot. You've traveled.
No.
So where on earth do you start? Is it linear? Are you starting it? So how is that process going for you?
I've lived way too many lives to have saved it for one memoir, because the public attention span is such that maybe I should have parceled it out a little, and I apologize for that. But it's honestly, I didn't really come to serious writing until during COVID times. I love to write. I used to always write magazine articles about cycling and about, how to train. And we wrote a training book and came out.
Yeah.
I was working on that the year Taylor was born in 1990.
Wow.
But the, the memoir, so where does it start? We decided it's going to be pretty chronological, I think. And I want, especially with the explosion right now of not only women's cycling, but women's sports, so few of them, the peloton, know who came before them and whose shoulders they're standing on. And so I really feel like it's my duty to provide some light, shed some light on that, and also how hard it was as a pioneer in both sports, really, in speed skating and cycling. And I also rode on the crew at college at a time when women's crew, women's crew in college wasn't considered a varsity sport. And so we didn't have the same privilege as the men, but we actually, it was a great experience for me, and I was lucky to be able to do it in college. But so I had all those experiences that, a lot of women won't have now because they'll be taught to specialize in one sport. Although I still think cycling can gain a lot of women from other sports, as we've always done, because if you've been training for another sport, especially an endurance sport, and you're prone to not be too afraid because you need to be a bit fearless to be in a peloton that's moving that fast. Need to learn to trust your bike and yourself and others around you, right? So it's not for everyone, but it is something we're going to see as more women crossing over, but at an earlier age and sticking with it longer. I retired when I was 27 because that was considered really old for a female athlete at the time.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Absolutely crazy. And a lot of people ask, like, do you think you could have gotten better? Well, duh. But in the milieu I was in, I don't know, because we just simply didn't have enough races. We didn't have enough of a challenge. And everybody's talking now about the Tour de France that happened between 84 and 89. And, didn't you want to do that? And there was very little lure to that. I had been to France to race, and it was so disorganized. And they didn't respect women, and especially women cyclists. And I think that generation was extraordinarily brave because they raced in the face of that, the face of the fact that the fans thought they were nuts.
Connie, I think it's just worth setting into a little bit of context the fact that when you won the Olympic gold in 1984 in Los Angeles, it was the first time the women's Olympic there'd been an Olympic road race. Okay, so that's immediately, it's like, what? A lot of people won't.
And only one, in one race, only one race. We waited all that time for one race. We didn't get the full slate of races that the men had. We had one race. Yeah.
And then there's the Tour de France, the Tour Féminin, because I went to see the Tour when Greg won in '86, and we had the Tour de France Féminin was on. I think it was I think Jenny Longo might have actually won it that year. I can't quite remember, but it was there. But it was almost as if it was shoehorned in. It was, and it pains me to say it, but it was treated almost. I was wide-eyed. I was a 16-year-old, but it was treated almost as a novelty. It was a strange. But now you look at the races now, and obviously your daughter-in-law Kasia's won the Tour de France. It's like, we need to talk about that a little bit as well. But the landscape has changed ridiculously. It's pretty much unrecognisable. And for you to have seen that, being a trailblazer, being a pioneer, in your own words, and seeing it now, there must be so much for you to talk about and to set into important historical perspective.
Yeah, it's so important what's happened, and it's also important to recognize how long it took. Yes. So just stop and ponder that. And you're right, the women were not just a novelty, they were an afterthought, and they strictly started doing, I believe this, and maybe nobody will say it outright from ASO, but they definitely, in my opinion, started the women's tour in 1984 because we had so much success in America with the Coors Classic. And which started at the Red Zinger, became the Coors Classic. We ran side by side with the men. We didn't have the same distances. We didn't need to. The fans were there. The fans loved us. The fans picked sides, like they had favorite racers. And the director of that race, Michael Eisner, would bring over the best women in Europe, and we got to race against them in what turned out to be my backyard, because I ended up, after college at UC Berkeley, I moved to Boulder because of Davis, because of a guy.
Sure.
And he was born and raised there, And so we were so fortunate to have that race through 1988, actually, but I stopped racing after 84. But those in France saw the success of it, and they were like, wow, we need to be doing something like this. And they had a tough job to try to do it up against the Tour, which is already such a beast, right? And so the women who did that race really suffered. Yeah, it was a sideshow, but a noteworthy one because they had all the best women in the world there. It's just that they weren't as respected as they are today. And the women today have earned that respect, but the women then had too. They just weren't acknowledged as such. They were such an anomaly in the culture, And when we first moved to Italy, even 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, 25 years ago, women just weren't exercising. I would go out and ride my bike, and I would never see another woman of my age. And then I was in my 40s. Now I'm in my 60s. I would never see women my age riding bikes. And now you see all over Europe, and the world really is more and more women of, young age and older age that are riding and more accepted, right? And here in Girona, you see a lot of fit women of any age, But no, what's happened, what's transpired during Kasia career, it's been so fun to be, her in her sphere through this whole journey, because especially when I first met her, she was, quite young and had herself just moved to Girona. And as a brave young girl, she'd moved from, rural Poland to Holland to compete on, I think her first team was, she was with Marianne Vos and,
She was, yeah.
Yeah. And hear this, think how brave that was, and then, and she didn't live a very glamorous life back then and, moved here and she and Taylor got together and, it wasn't really until Taylor stopped racing when he could fully appreciate her capacity, and what she was aiming to do and how, it was, it's just great. It's just so great to be able to be on those coattails. And before that, I had been very close with Evelyn Stevens, who you may remember. Yep. And Evie, I consider myself her friend and mentor. We spent a lot of time together, and and she didn't have a lot of role models. She might have had a coach, but she didn't really have a role model that she could look up to. And if I didn't understand the training as much, because they certainly train a lot more than I did, and with a lot more devices, I had none on my handlebars.
Yes. No.
I just had what was up here. And, I ended up getting a master's degree in science because I was so interested in the science of training. But honestly, it was so fun to be part of her world, before getting to know Kasia and being part of Kasia's world. So I feel really lucky.
Yeah, just on that point, clearly, because it's going to be very difficult to even touch on so many of the things that you've done and that you enjoy. But being a mentor, what's the part of that you enjoy the most?
I like listening. Thoughtful listening is so important for any athlete, and I like that my opinions are valued, if not always heated, because most athletes, I found this with Taylor too, is most athletes are, they'll take in a certain amount of information, but at the end of the day, they're going to do what they're going to do. And most athletes overtrain, or train to their strengths and don't train to their weaknesses, right? It's just natural. And no matter how good the coaching is. And so I think the best part is just, honestly, very selfishly, deep down in my heart and soul, is feeling relevant.
Okay. That's all. I admire your honesty. It's, And one thing that I want to hear from you, I've read about it a lot. I remember watching on TV when I was 14. How much of that day when you won the gold can you remember still? I would imagine it's still in sharp focus in a very cherished part of your mind. But can you describe a little bit about the feeling of winning the Olympics on home soil?
Well, my day was so fraught because Davis raced the same day. That wasn't really fair.
Was it the same day? I didn't realize. Right. Okay. Blimey.
And we were already married. We'd been married for 9 months already. And that day was so fraught because I think our race was at 9 a.m. which was a real luxury. And we pulled into the course. It was a 10-mile circuit in a suburb of Los Angeles called Mission Viejo. And we were staying in host housing not too far away. And we'd been training on the course, obviously, and we knew there were people that were setting up camp, so to speak, but we didn't realize how many people would sleep over like they would do, in Europe, in camper vans. They weren't really in camper vans. They were just in sleeping bags on the side of the road when we pulled in our USA, van. And I just had no expectation of the number of people that would turn out. First day of the home Olympics in Los Angeles, free to anyone. They were lined on some of the climbs, they were like 10 deep. And it was just thrilling. It was beyond thrilling. It was just, so unexpected and so wonderful.
Yeah.
And that everything went, I like to say, and I've written about it, I was unwrapping the race like a present, everything really went my way. I didn't fall down. I didn't have a flat tire. I didn't, I wasn't impeded by anyone. I ate and drank what I needed to. It was only a 2-hour race, which is short in comparison to today's races, but it was as long a race as women had ever had. 79 kilometers was considered a very long race. They almost made it a lap shorter, which would have been really short, but it was a tough course. And so, for me, what happened was after I won, Davis had to go straight away. He was at the finish line, grabbing me.
Fantastic,
and then he had to start 2 hours later. Or maybe even less. And the single strongest memory I have, other than watching him and feeling so disappointed when he came fifth, he really ran out of gas on the last lap because he felt too good that day and the pressure was too high for him to do what I had just done. Okay. I think it would have been much better if he could have raced the next day, not the same day. And it would have been better for.
That's a lot to cope with. That's a lot to cope with, isn't it? Emotionally, to see your partner winning like that, blimey.
And then, so the other thing was, we didn't have cell phones. 1984. My mother had multiple sclerosis. She couldn't travel to the race. My dad stayed home with her. I had family members out on the course who I, of course, didn't know where they were and wasn't going to see until after. But I wanted to talk to my parents. I had such an overwhelming urge. And I clambered down, I walked down the road, and went up into the little scaffolding that housed the TV commentators. And it was Greg LeMond, right. Eric Heiden, who I remember from speed skating, but also as a cyclist, and a childhood friend of mine. I've known Eric since he was 12.
He rode with Davis in 7-Eleven for a bit, didn't he, as well?
Yeah, he rode in the Tour. He's a big guy. But and Al Michaels, who's one of our most famous American commentators, were all sitting up in there, and I poked my head up and I said, "Hi guys, can I use your phone?" Because they had a dial-up phone in there, and I was able to call my parents. And so a lot of times when people, I think it's the most relatable part of my story is that when I finished the race, all I could think about was calling my parents. And you know what? They didn't answer right away.
Oh God.
And
weren't they watching on the TV? They were probably out celebrating.
And let me tell you this. It was the first time women's cycling was ever shown a race almost in its entirety, except for if they break away to another sport. And they'd never seen me race on TV before. And so they got to watch the whole thing. But then, when my mother finally answered the phone, she was out of breath in the backyard from running in from the backyard where she had been shooting off fireworks.
That's amazing. That is absolutely fantastic. Well, we got to forgive her then, haven't we, for that little?
Yes.
We got to forgive her that.
They made me, I thought, oh my God, did they have a heart attack? Did they forget what happened? But anyway, that day was super special, and it really put cycling, women's cycling, on the roadmap, okay, we're here to stay. And we made a lot of progress, but we also had a lot of setbacks over time. And part of that was because I think the Tour de France became too important in the cycling fans' eye. That was it. All other races paled in comparison. And then the women were really relegated again, I think, in the 90s, and financially just not supported the way they needed to be. And we've always had unbelievable talent in women's cycling, incredibly strong women, incredibly capable, but we just haven't always been able to see them like we can today. And how good are they today? I mean, come on. I
was going to say the racing and it's there's multiple levels here, isn't there? That there's the sadness really that so many women across all sport have never fulfilled their and actually life. Let's be honest, without getting too philosophical, have never reached their full potential. But we are now in a place where, in our sport, that is happening. We are. I wouldn't say we're fully on parity yet, but we're not far from it. And the acceleration has been amazing. But I'm really conscious about the time. But what just to finish off that particular point, can you tell us what it was like to see Kasia winning the race that we've just been talking about, the Tour de France, and the emotions there? I was on the climb, working for Eurosport, trying to remain neutral, but also in tears as well. I've got like cards on the table because it was whatever rider you were supporting that day. The battle on outdoors was one for the ages, wasn't it? And obviously your daughter-in-law was there, giving it more than everything. As was Demi fighting behind. It was something incredible, wasn't it? Just share your experience of the final hour of racing and just afterwards.
Well, I'd like you to know where I was. I had accepted an offer to give some talks down in New Zealand.
So you were in right, okay, right, okay.
I was in the wrong part of the world because I watched from 1 until 5 in the morning, and by myself, which was really hard.
Oh, no.
And of course, I was on the phone with Davis the whole time, and I was texting with other friends. And one of my friends said, she's going to get this by just a couple seconds. And the give and go was amazing. And I know Kasia well enough to know she's not going to give up.
Yep.
I don't know Demi, but I know she's not going to give up. But I also know that that the right person won. So I was crying. I mean, but the amazing thing is Kasia didn't understand this, and we've experienced it. My husband and I, Taylor's experienced it. When people care so much about you and your result that they start crying, and people that don't know you and may never meet you are literally weeping because of the effort you put forth. There's something so magic about sport that transcends all logic and words, and that is something that she'll never forget, and a lot of people watching that day won't forget. It was wonderful. It was so wonderful.
The way that our sport binds people together for the reasons that you've described, the joy it gives us, the focus, the travel, the making new friends, meeting new people, passing on your experience when you've finished racing to others, that the mentorship, the coaching, but then ultimately is the invisible connections that it gives us, like the fact that I've spoken to so many people about it. A lot of my friends who know me because of what I do, but have never raced, were watching it, and they don't know Kasia, and they were in tears seeing this,
right,
and seeing how much that everybody was giving, and it makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up now, thinking about the reaction of my friends just watching cycling, probably for the first time, and it is powerful, isn't it?
And a lot of that was what I experienced in my race, because nobody had ever seen women cycling like that at the Olympics in '84. And everywhere I went afterwards, that was the reaction of people. And so I know what it's like to be at that kind of crucible moment. It's just like, what? The bells are ringing. And it's just so amazing. But, you don't have to. The problem with sport, if you're still competing, is she feels like she has to duplicate that, and I'm like, you know what? That's for history. That's done. Whatever you do now going forward, fine, go for it, because you're hungry and you love to compete. But that moment, was I think it's really defining, and it really shows us what women can do in sport and what fans will take from it, and that you don't have sponsors without the fans.
No, totally. Well, Connie, I think that's a lovely way to wrap things up. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I could have sat here for another couple of hours talking about your life. But when do you, just a final question, just in relation to your journal, because when do you think you're going to be completing your journals? Because are you midway through it? Are you nearly wrapping it up, or are you in the early stages?
Oh no, I'm 130,000 words, needing to come down to about 100,000 words, or maybe 90,000 words.
So you're trimming now. So you're in the editing. Okay, right. So we should be able to see something this year, do you think?
Oh no, it takes forever for these things to get published. And I don't have a literary agent, so if you got some help with that, let me know. And and a publisher, that's hard. I've been just doing this out of love and because I know it's something that needs to be read or I need to put out there in the world. And if nothing else, my kids will and Kasha will know all my backstory. So there you go.
Right. Well, I've got a few connections, and I will definitely make some calls because your story needs to be read and understood, because I think all it will do is inspire. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks for including me. Yep.
Not at all. It's been an absolute privilege. I wish we could make it a bit longer, but Connie,
Okay.
thank you very
That's great.
much.
Yeah.